Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Edge of Tomorrow. Episode 12. Chapter 96a. What was on that note card that made him scurry out of here so fast? Cade whispered low in my ear as we followed his parents out of the council room. The council room led out into a large foyer. A crystal chandelier half the size of a car hung from the ceiling. There were 4 elevators on both the left and right side of the room. Many of the witnesses here were alphas and lunas, which meant sharing an elevator with others you don't know, not always the safest move. Many of the witnesses were heading down to the restaurant within the hotel, while some others were planning a trip to the bar down the street. Why am I not surprised you saw that too? I chuckled, placing my hands against the smooth material of his button-down. Like all moments have since Alec was taken, we both quickly turned serious. I have no clue what it could have said. Whatever it was, it caused a crack in his self-control. He's able to manage his emotions so well, I can't even detect them. This crack, it let me see just a little. If it made him crack, then it had to be important. Cade grunted, information is never a bad thing, and it might be worth knowing what caused Marcus Novak to run so quickly. I might be able to ask Jaspa, but there's no telling if he knows. I replied with a shrug, but then thought of Zane. Or we can ask you-know-who, but I doubt he'd be willing to help us. Cade's response was lost to the wind, because something else caught my attention. The golden-haired Alpha and Luna were emerging from the council room, their 4 guards trailing alongside them. I want to talk to those people. I mumbled to Cade, pushing past him as I scampered after the Alpha and Luna. Their emotions were so steady, like the sun that would inevitably break through the storm that darkened the world. Excuse me. I shouted, maneuvering past an older couple as I jogged a few more feet forward. I kept enough distance not to be perceived as a threat, but I don't believe the couple was actually expecting me to speak to them. The woman turned around first, her eyes narrowed into slits until she realized who I was. Her glare turned into a look of surprise, then one of anticipation. It was strange to feel her go through these emotions. It felt like she already knew me, and knew where this conversation might lead. Come, Claire. I will not speak in front of these people. The golden-haired woman met my eyes, and spoke with a delicately accented voice. The tone of her words, they were warm, but held the potential to set the world on fire. She began walking forward with her maid again, but paused and turned back to Cade and I. You may bring your mate. Now, come. You sure about this, sweetheart? Cade asked low enough for only I to hear. We both watched as the couple continued walking, stopping to press the button on one of the elevators. I had only a few moments to decide before those doors opened, letting in the 2 people who actually seemed to see the truth. I'm not sure, but I know I need to talk to them. I grinned a bit sheepishly and took off after the couple. You trust the high table enough to step into their domain, but you cannot extend that courtesy to us. The man remarked in a sour tone. His emotions pointed more towards offense than any malice, and his glare towards the council room lead me to believe the same. She does not trust the high table, Isaiah. The woman frowned at her mate and patted his hand with her own. She is wise for trusting only those she brought at her side. Now, bottle your anger, and let us speak. Isaiah was silent as the 8 of us stepped into the elevator. He swiped his key against the pad, which allowed us to travel to their respective floor. These elevators were larger than your normal ones, and fit us easily. Classical music played quietly through small speakers within the elevator, and the woman seemed to hum the tune under her breath. Their room was a suite that mirrored mine and Cade's. It made me feel a bit better to know that I wasn't receiving any special treatment while here. My room was the same as everyone else's, extravagant as all hell. I was beginning to miss my room back at the twins' house. It is safe to speak in here, the woman told Cade and I as she locked the door behind us. She wandered into the kitchen and pulled out 2 wine glasses. Her seafoam eyes would occasionally dart to where Cade and I stood as she talked. You both may call me Mira. You are as safe here as in your own suite. We keep guards posted in our room, even if we are not here. We have everything checked for microphones and cameras daily. You really believe that's necessary? Cade asked her, to which Isaiah responded instantly. Don't you? Isaiah snorted. The sound was somewhat amusing with his delicate accent, but I couldn't mistake the irritation bubbling away beneath his skin. The high table are children who fight over every shiny toy they come across. They have destroyed packs, families, and lives in pursuit of the newest thing. Then they shove platitudes of preserving our species in your gullet until you're so stuffed with their sh. Do not work yourself up again, dearest. Mara sighed, running her fingers through Isaiah's close-cropped hair. Some of the tension faded from his shoulders, and I instinctively sought out that same comfort from Cade. You become too stressed as of late. When you were speaking about the high table, were you speaking from personal experience? I asked a bit boldly, but I had a feeling Isaiah and Mara might like that quality in a person. Both stilled, their questioning eyes on me. They were weighing what they should tell me, what version of the truth I might be privy to. Deciding to take another route, I hardened my voice and hoped the 2 of them could read the determination in my eye, the desperate need for change that pulsed in my veins. I'm here fighting for my right to live, proving that I deserve to live like everyone else. I told them both, feeling my own anger swell in my chest. No one should have to prove their right to live, it was one thing we were all given freely. If anyone understands hating the high table, it's me. What many of us feel, it goes beyond hate. Once hate festers and grows, it becomes a disease that traps you. Isaiah growled under his breath. I could feel the last of his resistance chip away as he saw the same light burning in my eyes that also burned in his. The high table was once just. It was a time we truly flourished. We did not overtake human cities, but lived amongst them. Your kind was not hunted during that time. Mara said in the same strong voice as her mate, there are still just as many of you now, but you know what happens to most of them. Marcus. I nodded, seeing the approval in her eyes. She was weighing how much I knew, while giving me some information of their own. It was a give and take, I realized. We were trusting one another, getting to know one another. Was this how alliances were made? Good, you are not ignorant like many of our kind. Mara spat, looking truly angry for the first time. He hides behind his smiles and pretty words, but there is no beauty inside, only rot. My wife has more reason than most to despise Marcus Novak. Isaiah frowned, taking Mara's hand in his own and tugging her until she conceded and sat beside him on the couch. It was a long time ago, much has changed since then. Much has gotten worse since then. Mara sighed, leveling her gaze on my own. You want to fight against Marcus Novak? Fine, then you should know what you're up against. Are you sure about this, Mara? Isaiah asked, his eyes flickering over to Cade and I. His voice went a little quieter as he talked, even though Cade and I could still hear every word he said. You do not need to reopen these wounds for them. I will not see you in pain. I will tell them what they need to know while you are away from the room. Dearest, you've always protected me. Mara smiled fondly at her mate, placing her hands on either side of his face. Isaiah looked older now, no longer his early 20s, as he stared at the woman who had become his entire world. There are times where I must be strong. I have not in the past, but I will learn from these mistakes, Isaiah. I will heed my sister's word. Isaiah smiled sadly at his mate and placed his lips against her forehead. I protect you, because even now, I cannot stand to see you in pain. I will gladly shoulder it all if it means you remain free. I will never be free, Isaiah. Not until they are all free. Mara said softly, and Isaiah nodded, as though he had agreed to this very thing many times before. Tell them your story, Mara. Isaiah's smile was small, but it was one solely reserved for Mara, a smile created for her. Let Sabine live and breathe through your words. When I was 14 years old, Marcus Novak became the third member of the High Table. His father won this battle by the skin of his teeth, which meant the land was surrendered to the Novak family. Marcus's father ruled as the third High Table member for 5 years before he finally passed away, then Marcus took over. 2 years later, none other than Marcus Novak was visiting my pack. Mara laughed dryly, her narrowed eyes filling with tears she would not allow to fall. Our pack was large, and sometimes gained the attention of the High Table, but never had they visited before. My father was beta of our pack, his childhood best friend had grown up to become the alpha. You see, it was all very picturesque. Until, the day Marcus showed up. We didn't know it at the time, but there was something he had been looking for. He spent 2 years looking, searching endlessly while all of the other High Table members remained clueless. He was searching for white wolves. Marcus has been head of the High Table for 8 years. Those first 2, he had occupied the third seat. Isaiah chimed in, crossing one leg over his lap as he reclined on the couch. So, he jumped from third place, to the head. I noted, unable to ignore the fishy feeling I got. How'd he manages to jump spots? Shouldn't that be hard to accomplish? Oh, it's very hard. You have to make your own pack and land larger, which means picking off smaller packs. You have to be careful when doing that. A lot of those smaller packs have alliances with High Table members, and you don't want to screw over a fellow member. Isaiah shook his head. Marcus Novak jumped to the head shortly after leaving my pack with what he had been searching for. Mara said darkly, her seafoam eyes turning navy in color. My little sister, Sabine. She had always been special, prone to fits at night. She'd thrash and scream, but always quiet and fall back asleep. One night, she didn't. She started speaking, saying these strange things that made no sense. We hadn't realized she was an oracle, and that this was her white wolf ability manifesting itself. After a few years, she actually got the hang of it. The last time I saw my sister was when she was 13, and Marcus Novak was escorting her away. Your sister was an oracle? I asked, marveling for a moment. The ability seemed like a taxing one, but it sounded nice to be called an oracle and not a soul eater. Nothing says run in the other direction like being called a soul eater. She could see the future? How did that work? It was hard on her as a child, having that kind of responsibility. It can take some of the magic and fun away from a childhood. She handled it as well as a child could. Some days were better than others. Mara confessed with a look of longing on her face. Even after all this time, her grief was still so raw, so close to the surface. She carried her pain with her, and spent every waking moment remembering its name. There was one night that I remembered most, the only night she had told me what she saw. You believe this is relevant, Mara? That Sabine meant her? Isaiah questioned, his eyes brightening just a bit. I do believe this is who Sabine spoke of, and I will honor her request to completion. Mara nodded, her voice stern and true as she stared down her mate. You know I would follow you anywhere, Mara. Isaiah nodded, letting her take the lead. The day before Marcus Novak came into town, she woke me in the middle of the night screaming. Tears were pouring down her cheeks, and her heart was racing fast enough to frighten me. She was sobbing, speaking of some battle. I grabbed her shoulders, and I screamed her name. I screamed and screamed until my voice went hoarse. Her eyes snapped open, and she sat up from the bed in a start. Mara shuddered. She told me, when you meet the girl with eyes of water and earth, help her. Give her what she needs, and the world will flourish. Eyes of water and earth. I scoffed, turning my face towards a golden mirror that sat on the far wall. I shook my head, unable to believe that some child years ago had seen anything to do with me. I really wanted to believe I wasn't the girl she had been talking about, but even I couldn't tell a lie that big. I had known all along that war could come once the High Table knew about me. I accepted that I would fight with my mates and pack, and survive or die alongside of them. This bit of information was only confirming what we all knew, but it was all I could take for the moment. Having a great destiny is not something one wishes for. They are difficult, painful, and often messy. And rarely do they end the way we hope. Isaiah told me, his voice firm and resolute. He was not the type of man to run from his problems, but the type to embrace the pain and charge forward. There are always lives lost when change comes to the world. It is horrible and a waste of life, but it is a fact of the world. One that will never be altered. Those who bring change will always be resisted. The question is this cause worth it to you, Claire? I didn't need time to think to come up with an answer. My answer had been there all along, something I knew but was unwilling to admit to myself. This cause is more important than what I want, than what we all want. It's worth giving our lives for. We'll save generations of children from being hunted, enslaved, and used for their abilities. White wolves will fill the world again, and we will allow them to live the way they see fit. I told both Isaiah and Mara, mustering up much more confidence than I actually had. Those willing to change and adapt can keep their place on the high table, but those who want to plunge us even further into darkness, they won't survive in this new world, none of them will. We have long been on the side of white wolves, even when we have to stomach the insanity of the high table. Isaiah growled, our pack will fight with yours, Luna Claire. We know you do not wish for war, but we are less hopeful. Mara smiled softly, years spent under the high table's thumb, watching Marcus become more and more powerful. He will never bow down, not unless forced. Kate and I called down our own guards to escort us back to our suite. I was feeling a bit lighter, filled with just a little more hope. We had stayed for another half hour, talking with Isaiah and Mara. I told them of how I met the twins, and Mara explained how she had run into Isaiah when he was a young alpha. We were still strangers by all accounts, but Mara was the kind of person you wanted to trust. She was wholeheartedly honest, brutal, and completely savage when it came to those she cared about. Isaiah was a bit rough around the edges, but every ounce of pain his mate experienced at the high table's hands had weighed on him as well. I doubt I'll be able to sleep after that, especially with everything that's going on tonight. I sighed, leaning back against Kate's chest. Do you think Zane will really let Alec free if his wolves get out safely? He better, or he'll find himself gutted before the day is up. Kate snarled softly, we've never been separated for this long before. It's not how it is with normal siblings. We've never fought before, and neither of us feel any need to spend time apart. We've always been one person. It feels the same for me too, you know. I murmured, curled up against Cade's side. My throat ached, and my eyes burned with unshed tears, but I was tired of crying. I craved and missed Alec so badly my body ached, but I refused to sit here crying about it. That's not what a werewolf would do, and it's certainly not what a Luna would do. I feel like a part of myself is missing. I can feel it out there, but I just can't reach it. A knock on the door draws us from the bedroom and into the living area. Cade opened the front door while I perched on the arm of the couch with a cup of coffee in hand. The two of us were staying up tonight. I had been plying myself with caffeine since dinner, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep regardless. Tonight, we would find out if our plan to transport Zane's White Wolf friends worked or not. The thought that I might have Alec back in just a few days, it was too much to handle. I was wired with or without the coffee. Garrett stepped into the room, followed by Julian. Garrett seemed to blend in with these people. He was always impeccably dressed, and carried that same snooty air about him. While I didn't completely despise Garrett anymore, we were a long way away from becoming friends. Mind if let's just get into this, will we? Garrett sighed, pulling out a manila folder full of documents. He pinched the bridge of his nose briefly before continuing, "These offers you're getting from the high table members, here are the official documents. They outline everything, including the fine print. The question is, are you interested in any of them?" Julian asked, shooting Garrett a dirty look. Sometimes I forgot the two of them were in their late 40s. They so often acted like warring siblings around one another. If Marcus Novak wasn't the man I know him to be, his offer would have been golden. Garrett scoffed, shaking his head. Brayden's offer isn't bad as well, but the fine print is loaded with additional stipulations. Julian said, pulling out a small stack of papers from the manila folder. He spread a few of them out in front of us, pointing at some highlighted bits on the page. You would essentially allow him to perform experiments, to monitor you, and to test your abilities in any way he sees fit. He'd have a lot of power over me. I noticed instantly, all of that could easily be used against me. Agreed. Garrett nodded, meeting my eyes. I cringed away from the protectiveness that seemed to hide within him, and was content on pretending I hadn't felt it at all. It's best not to consider his offer at all. That leaves Jasper Fox. Julian said, again pulling out a few sheets of paper. He snorted as he handed me the page, and I understood why when I looked at the contract Jasper had written up. Where the others had pages upon pages of stipulations and conditions, Jasper's contract was roughly a paragraph long. He just wants to be allies. I scoffed, that's it. Specifically, it says under no conditions or circumstances would Luna Claire be obligated to defend Alpha Jasper Fox or his pack, using her White Wolf abilities. Julian repeated, smirking as he finished. Straightforward man, not always a bad thing. Always better than tiptoeing around, using them fancy words. They're not considered fancy if you have an education. Garrett rolled his eyes, a very unrefined action. What do you think of Jasper's offer? Cade asked, pulling me closer across the couch we both sat on. Even though I was Luna, it still made my stomach flutter when he asked what I thought we should do. I wasn't used to having the power to make all of these decisions, but I was enjoying finally taking control of my life. I think I want to know him more. Julian was right, he is straightforward, but that can't be all there is to him. I told Cade truthfully, he seems like the type of alpha we could actually have an alliance with, but we also hardly know the man. It isn't very smart to agree to an alliance with someone we hardly know. I was thinking the same thing. Cade chuckled, unfortunately, they'll be expecting an answer from you tomorrow. That gives us little to no time to figure out what kind of man Jasper Fox is. Also, there is no contract from Desmond DeVille. The use of Desmond's name cut through my attention, tearing it away from Cade. It was Julian who had spoken. It's pretty odd he wouldn't make an offer, considering the other members are. Usually, he jumps on whatever team Marcus vouches for. I had never been the best liar, so I could only hope I managed to clear the shock and guilt from my face. Cade's hand at my back, and the fact that neither seemed to notice a thing, was what helped calm me down. Julian and Garrett left nearly an hour later, after going over the plan for the White Wolves a fifth time. Tori showed up shortly after, flustered and more than ready to stay up all night with us. The three of us did what we could to distract ourselves, but movies and video games could only get you so far. Eventually, there was nothing left to do but think and wait. "Are you going to spill already?" I asked once Cade retreated into the bathroom to take a shower. Truthfully, he had gone to give the two of us some alone time, but I appreciated the gesture nonetheless. "Spill?" Tori asked cluelessly, even though she knew exactly what I was talking about. "Yup, spill." I chuckled, "You've been wanting to tell me something since you've gotten here. Now, what is it?" "Oh yeah, well." Tori stammered, which was completely unlike her. She wasn't someone who became flustered easily, which made me worried something bad had happened. I was just trying to pick the best moment to say something. "Well, now you've got me worried." My laugh fizzled out at the end, making Tori's eyes widen. "Oh, no. It's nothing like that." She laughed breathlessly, but I could hear how forced it sounded. I waited until her laughter trailed off, and she finally gave in. Within her emotions, there was a flicker of that soul-deep pain that constantly ate at her. "Oh, all right. Something kind of happened with Zane. I mean, with him and I." I paused for a few moments, confused. My mind had first jumped to the thought of them sleeping together, but wouldn't she be happier? Unless it wasn't very enjoyable, I supposed. "Don't even go there. I can practically see what you're thinking, and no. We did not. Don't even disrespect me by putting that into words." She groaned, burying her face into the pillow that rested on my bed. I let her have a few moments. When she came up for air, she was only a little red in the face. "I can feel the pull of the bond, and I know he can feel it too. He thinks treating me like shit will make the bond face, but it's only making him lose his patience. Yesterday, I went outside to video call my parents, and on the way inside, I ran into him. Literally, I ran into him. He flipped out when he noticed it was me, and you know I'm not taking any of that shit, so I stood my ground. He pushed me against the wall again, and before I could kick him, he looked down at my lips. I knew he wanted to kiss me. I knew because I could feel it too, and I froze there. I couldn't even move. It took me some time to figure out what I wanted to say. The last thing I wanted to do was tear down any hope she might have of a mate. No matter how I felt about Zane, that wasn't what Tori deserved. If he changed his mind, would the bond between you two be intact? I asked, as there were still some holes in my knowledge. There wasn't much I could say, and even less I could do. So instead of making false promises, I did all that I could to remind her I was here. "Is that something you would want? I know the outcome for rejected wolves, and I wouldn't ever want that happening to you. You know that no matter what, I support your choice, right?" "I'm not sure what I want, Claire. The bond makes me want him, but how can I ever love someone who never wanted me to begin with?" I wasn't good enough for him, so how can I ever be? She asked, and I could feel my heart break along with hers. I had no clue how she managed to remain tearless. My eyes were already filling, which I fought with vicious blinks. A final testament to Tori's strength, her voice never once cracked as she poured her heart out to me. This is the last thing I wanted. When I pictured my mate, I saw my future. I saw my family, my children, and my parents. What makes it even worse, Zane looks exactly like how I always pictured my mate. Maybe someday he'll regret what he had done, but I won't beg him to want me. A short life where I'm free is better than a long one, trapped by a man I'm destined to love. I let Tori say everything she needed, even when her face turned red with anger, and she spewed all sorts of colorful words towards Zane. Her temper would often override everything else, but she was one to never, ever back down. The three of us stayed up until our eyes grew heavy and dry. The coffee I drank now tasted stale and bitter, even though the machine in our suite was easily a grand. No amount of caffeine in the world was keeping me awake, and when my eyes fluttered shut, I hadn't the strength to question it. A small, steady beeping sound dragged me kicking and screaming from my sleep. It wasn't the sound of a heart monitor, but something more annoying. The beeps were fast, high-pitched and blasting throughout the room. It took a few cycles of that beeping sound to finally come to. The phone. I gasped, my voice painfully hoarse. I flung myself from the bed at the same time Tori and Cade did. The three of us had fallen asleep across the king-sized bed, a mess of limbs and crumpled blankets. The three of us snatched for the phone, until Cade managed to grab it first. He pressed the answer button swiftly, and I eyed the tuft of hair on his head that somehow managed to stick straight up. I promised myself I'd laugh at it later if we had good news. Cade's emotions were impassive as he responded to the man on the phone. I was practically bouncing up and down on my feet, waiting for the words that would get us Alec back. I sucked in a sharp breath as grief rolled through Cade. I was sucked into my own mind, unable to feel the weight of my body. I was sure I could feel myself falling, but didn't fully snap back into reality until Cade's arms wrapped around my waist. He kept me from falling to the ground, but could do nothing to stop the tears that left tracks down my cheeks. "They're in Garrett's territory, sweetheart. In just a few hours they'll be in our town. The men did it, the White Wolves are safe." Cade whispered against the top of my head, holding me close as I cried out my relief. Chapter 97. They did it. They're safe. I gasped, my hands covering my mouth as I gaped at Cade. My happiness was overrun with confusion. "Why were you feeling grief?" "We lost a few of our men out there." He grimaced. Typically Alec and I would visit the family ourselves to break the news, but Alec's not here, and home is far away. I've done nothing but worry this entire time, and I can't take it anymore. I admitted with a sigh, now that we've held up our end, Zane has no choice but to hold up his. I wouldn't be able to live with killing him, not when he's Tori's mate. You can rough him up a bit and hand him over to her though, I'm sure she'd enjoy that. I wouldn't do that to her, not unless she approved. Cade promised with a small smile. I knew it went against his nature to leave a threat alive, but he couldn't go around picking off the high table. I had already offed one member unintentionally, and I refused to let that number creep higher. "We will." A knock sounded at the bedroom door, feather soft. The two of us hesitated for a moment, and watched as a note card was slid beneath the door. Cade motioned for me to wait, and darted over to the door. Whoever had delivered the note were gone before he had the chance to slide the lock. "What's it say?" I asked eagerly, figuring it were from Zane. "Guards are distracted for 15 minutes. Meet in room 213. Cade repeated in his deep baritone, seems Zane's gotten the news. How did he find out so fast? I asked. I gave Zane one of those disposable phones, and gave the man his number. He shrugged, figured it'd save me the trouble of sneaking the message. That was nice of you. I noted, unable to help it when my lips twitched. Cade's eyebrows lifted, nice of me. Yeah, to help Zane like that. I nodded, nearly choking on the laugh. You tease me when we're in a rush. He sighed sharply, narrowing his dark eyes at me. I felt a tingle of excitement between my legs as I thought of what might happen once we had Alec back with us. We brought Tori along as we snuck down to room 213. The note had been right. The two guards were currently down in the lobby, confused to how they got there. We slipped in the room and found it already brightly lit. Zane Novak sat in an armchair, and held a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked too neat and pristine to be a drinker, but the half-empty bottle spoke for itself. You all look horrible. Zane commented. I absolutely refused to let this prick sour my decently good mood. I bit back my response, but it seemed Tori was feeling extra feisty today. I had almost forgotten how snappy she gets when she's tired. It's hard to sleep when the fate of your best friend's mate rests on sneaking a group of white wolves out of a psychopath's territory. She snarled, pointing a finger at Zane's chest. I could tell the moment his eyes darkened ever so slightly, and something vicious and starving flashed within his emotions. He said nothing to her, but glanced down at the inch that kept her finger from touching his chest. He lifted a pale eyebrow and kept his seafoam eyes on hers. Also, there is another problem. Zane said to Cade and I, choosing to turn his attention away from Tori. I could feel her anger snap and fizzle out as she backed away from Zane. While Zane's emotions were strange like his father's, I could feel how he affected Tori. I also knew that Tori had some sort of effect on him as well. Is this about my brother? Cade all but snarled, and found myself digging my nails into the soft fabric of his t-shirt. No, that's another matter altogether. He sighed, waving his hand. His eyes turned from Cade to I. Ever since he showed up at the cabin, Zane's gaze had a strange affect. Where most people would look away at some point, his focus was unwavering. It was sharpened and honed, a weapon in its own right. My father has found out about the missing white wolves. He has no proof who was truly involved, but we're going to deal with some backlash if he even suspects we had anything to do with it. We'll keep our end, he won't suspect a thing from us. Cade promised him, to which I also nodded. Very well. There's something else I might tell you, then. Zane cleared his throat, and actually looked a bit uncomfortable. Sebastian Sable has created a movement against you, and it's been gaining some traction. Some of the witnesses are actively turning against you. Sebastian will expect the High Table to come to a vote today, most likely regarding your place in our world. It's also to my knowledge that Nico Deville will be siding with Sebastian on this argument. So long as my father doesn't know what we've done, I can assume he would side with you. I wasn't surprised about the news regarding Sebastian. I could feel how much he absolutely despised me. It was only fitting he'd retaliate in some way, though I expected it to be much more violent. I was certainly disappointed in Nico Deville, but again, the news wasn't very astounding. That left Braden Cliff and Jasper Fox, and I had no clue how either would vote. Jasper certainly seems like he's on my side, but that talk of an alliance could have easily been false. Braden seemed on the side of logic, which left me clueless. The man wanted to experiment on me for crying out loud, how was I supposed to know what he'd choose? We'll just have to deal with it then. I sighed after a few moments of silence, squaring my shoulders. They can try, but my life isn't going to be dictated by a vote. It's time to hold up your end of the deal, Novak. Cade grunted, stifling a snarl that threatened to tear from his throat. Getting your brother isn't going to be as simple as I made it out to be. Zane huffed, rolling his eyes when Cade stormed forward snarling. Enough! I snapped, grabbing Cade's arm. I gave Zane my best murderous glare, which must have been pretty good considering he had the wit to pale. Do you have a death wish? Quit with him, or I won't bother holding him back. As miserable as your life might be, we have more important things to worry about. I said it wouldn't be simple, not that it's impossible. Zane snarled, smoothing down his suit. It took time to get the information I needed. I had to make sure nothing, absolutely nothing, made its way back to my father. There has to be no trace of our interference here today. Our interference? I asked slowly. Unless there's someone else you trust to come with me to rescue your mate. Zane said in a flat voice, turns out there's more security than I anticipated, and the friend I have helping us can only take out so many. I gave Cade a long look, and I swore he knew what I was thinking. We were both clearly on the same page from the looks of it. We're in. Cade nodded. Now, who's this friend you have coming? She's here already. Zane replied, gesturing to one of the bedrooms. My father doesn't know she's here, which has to remain that way. He'll be able to connect the dots if he finds her. She's a white wolf, isn't she? I asked, unable to conceal my interest. She is. Zane said after a long moment in silence. Clearly, he favored a new subject, because he changed tactics rather quickly. Alec is being kept half an hour from here, in River Crest. River Crest was meant to be a bustling city, but things happened and money came up short. They turned it into half-assed houses that aren't worth what they're sold for. A lot of them are abandoned, and that's where your brother is being kept. He's been this close the entire time. I said weakly. I haven't felt anything through the bond. Since seeing the mark on his neck, they would have been keeping him pissed the entire time. Zane frowned. I'm sure he hasn't been awake for much of anything since he was taken. When are we leaving? Cade snarled, as ready to get his brother back as I was. Now, if you plan to sneak past your guardians. Zane shrugged. If you plan to run it by them, I'd say in an hour or so. They're going to kill us. I told Cade, leaning to whisper at him from the back seat of the sedan we arrived in. I am never ever going to hear the end of it from Garrett. I will rip his tongue out if you wish, sweetheart. Cade smirked from the driver's seat. Cade was currently driving the sedan, with Zane sitting passenger. It was an awkward duo, especially compared to the three of us in the back. Yes, I said three. Zane's help was a white wolf named Ava. She was clearly only a teenager, but looked older in her fishnets, pleated skirt, and torn t-shirt. She was actually pretty cool, though I didn't believe her when she vogued that Zane really wasn't that bad. Zane's one redeeming quality was that the white wolves he used weren't slaves, they willingly worked with him. He had been helping wolves out of his father's clutches for years, but had never done anything to actually stand up to the man. I was currently seated between her and Tori as we sped down the highway. No matter how sweetly I asked, she absolutely refused to tell me what she could do until the time came. She was more than enthusiastic when it came to my own abilities, and my potential to become a soul eater. I could hear the music blasting through the headphones she wore, but was silently grateful for the distraction. Question after question bubbled in my mind until I had no choice but to ask them. This house, does it belong to the High Table? I asked Zane, my thoughts running a mile a minute. If the High Table owned this house, that meant they were exclusively responsible for taking Alec. They wanted to use him against me, and bend me to their will. Zane was quiet for a few moments, and through that crack in his shell, I could feel just a whisper of worry. The deed says it's owned by Desmond DeVille. Zane said slowly, I've been checking all documents of my father's, and I decided to check this one. He's been known to hold things in other people's names, to use them as a scapegoat. This deed is one of his documents. He placed it in Desmond DeVille's name for a reason, most likely to draw attention to him should Alec be rescued or escape. I have another acquaintance with the ability to procure memories from an object. She told me what I needed to know. That's not all you wanted to say, though. Is it? I asked, hoping he'd be truthful instead of becoming all sour and shut down. I knew a man like Zane wouldn't appreciate me eavesdropping on his emotions, so bringing those up were out of the picture. Zane let out a long sigh. I know everything about my father's businesses, even the unsavory ones. I had absolutely no clue he owned this house, let alone it even existed. I'm second in command and in line to take over, but now I'm beginning to wonder if there might be more I don't know about him. Chapter 98. Men like Marcus are always hiding something, always. Cade said, his voice not cruel and demeaning, but factual. They have piles upon piles of skeletons in their closets. They might let you see a few, but they will never give their full hand. Apart from the muffled heavy metal music blasting from Ava's headphones, the inside of the sedan was silent. The purr of the engine as we coasted down the highway was the only thing to be heard. The emotions that sat within this small confined space were beginning to give me a headache. Only Ava seemed completely at ease, so utterly joyful that she was like a Tylenol to my aching head. Her teenage ignorance and excitement for danger felt good, like a reprieve from the weight of everyone else's emotions. Tori and Zane were so aware of each other that every shift, every exhale or sound that came from one had the other reacting. Zane still had an ironclad grip on his emotions, but Tori was practically an open book. While I still could only see through that small crack in Zane's emotions, I was definitely beginning to pick up on his social cues as well. Anytime Tori sighed or yawned, his fingers would twitch. Her phone vibrated against the leather seat of the sedan, and when she answered a call from her dad, Zane's entire body went stiff. After a few moments, he turned his eyes to the passing forest and spoke. That reminds me of something my father would always say. He mused, and though his voice was thoughtful, that cold edge still remained. Never reveal your full hand. We stewed in his words for the next 25 minutes. Had we been fools to trust Zane? Sure, he had willingly stepped into a vehicle with us, but here we were, driving to some unknown location with the hopes of getting Alec back. Was Zane revealing his full hand? No, I highly doubted that. By the time we turned into a rundown neighborhood with more abandoned houses than livable ones, I had made my decision. I had told myself hundreds of times that the twins were worth risking everything for, and now I needed to back those words up. The houses had the structure and design to have looked really nice, nicer than anything I had ever lived in. It was clear funds dried up because some houses lacked small things like paint or a front porch, while others were missing windows and doors. I would walk into this completely blind, trusting someone who has every reason to put me in chains, because Alec and Cade are my only true weaknesses. Where are we going? I asked Cade, who had passed the neighborhood altogether. We're going to the next street over. There's a heavily wooded area in between the two, which we can use as cover to get into the house. Zane responded before Cade had the chance, which I suppose made sense. This was his plan after all. Wouldn't Marcus put wolves in the forest? I asked, a bit confused. As I said previously, I gathered as much information as I could on this place. Zane said harshly, which made both Cade, Tori, and I narrow our eyes. For just a moment, I wished Zane could feel emotions, because he'd see how close he just came to becoming roadkill. While Zane was actually fairly intelligent and quickly tried to rectify his mistake. This place isn't supposed to exist. He's placed men inside the house, and some in a neighboring one, nothing more. Anything else would draw attention. Too many different scents lingering around. I feel as though I'm qualified to give you advice, since I am on Claire's good side. Tori's tone was sickly sweet, and I knew that meant trouble. The tension between them was steadily growing, especially now, forced in such a small space together. I was practically drowning in Cade's scent, and knew that any inkling of desire from me would set off his own. Though I couldn't tell exactly what Zane felt, I knew he had to be affected by her presence. Tori continued without missing a beat, smirking at him through the mirror. She's going to take your dad's place on the high table. You might want to be just a bit more respectful. Zane's icy eyes turned hard as he glared at Tori. With his golden hair and baby blue eyes, his expression clashed with his looks. A guy like him wasn't meant to brood and grimace, it gave him a sort of rough edge to his beauty. Just as Zane opened his mouth to start what I'm sure would be a huge argument, Cade pulled into the pothole-ridden driveway of one of the abandoned houses. This driveway wrapped around the house, leading straight to the back. It would provide us cover for the sedan, which looked out of place in a neighborhood this decrepit. The actual garage was nothing more than a hollow shell of rotted wooden planks and poorly done cement. Still, we pulled up to the lopsided structure and parked. Judging from the markers in the ground, there was supposed to be a fence surrounding the backyard. It was just another unfinished thing in this neighborhood. It was an easy 10-minute trek through the small forest that separated the neighborhood's backyards. We stopped a few feet from the forest line, peering at a row of abandoned houses. There was one at the center that seemed just a bit more put together than the others. There were sheets covering the windows, like makeshift curtains. Another positive note was that the house actually had a door. As my eyes scanned a few more houses down, I noticed nearly the same thing. Two houses that looked just a hint nicer than the others. There's two houses. One has Alec, the other is where the guards stay. It's inconspicuous, and keeps them from traveling back and forth. Zane pointed out the two houses, the one at the center has Alec. Ava and I are going to the house with the guards. We'll incapacitate them while the three of you scope out the house that has Alec. There will be guards, so you need to make sure you're not seen. Do not go inside the house, not until Ava and I come back. So, I'm supposed to trust you with my life? Tori scoffed, her fiery curls shimmering in the morning light. Not a chance, Novak. There has to be someone there with Ava. Someone strong enough to protect her. Zane snarled back, his eyes narrowing on Tori's rigid frame. I'll go with Ava. Cade spoke up, surprising even me. He barely glanced at Zane as he said, You can go with Claire and Tori. You do know this could end horribly with those two paired together, right? I told Cade, letting my thoughts mesh with his own. Both he and Alec were like a constant stream in my mind. I could tap into their thoughts at any point if I chose. Since he had been taken, I hadn't been able to feel Alec's stream of thoughts. It made sense Zane had said they would have kept Alec annoyed. I have faith Zane cares enough about his life to pull this off. Cade's thoughts had an angry edge, but he managed to hold it together for Alec and I. He'll try to resist the mate bond, and he will fail. It could still end badly, but there's no point in walking on eggshells around them. I suppose it would be nice to see her chew him out again. I sighed, resigning to my fate. Ava, get those headphones out. Zane huffed, clearly trying to rein in his patience. Once her headphones were finally put away, and she was back in reality, Zane went over the plan. Kate and Ava will call when they're leaving the pack house. We'll have about 20 minutes to get Alec and get out. I'll try and give us more time if I can, but I can't exert myself too hard. Ava chirped, pulling a stick of gum from her pocket. She certainly looked older than a teenager, but still carried that air of not taking anything too seriously. She let out a laugh, not going to be very helpful if I'm all comatose myself. Ava, focus. Zane commented under his breath, as though he had done this countless times before. His eyes darted up to Cade momentarily, keep her on track. She gets distracted easily. Will do. Cade nodded bluntly. Overdramatic, much. Ava snorted, narrowing her heavily lined eyes. They were blended and smoky in a way that showed she had incredible talent. It was a far cry from the choppy blended look I had once tried when I was 14. I miss one guy and it's like I said, keep her on track. Zane bit out through clenched teeth. He passed Cade one of those disposable phones and continued, use this to keep in contact. We'll let you know of any guards we see. And what about our faces? Torai asked, her typically friendly voice was hard and calluses. Unless Ava can erase memories, we can't let them see our faces. I've got that bit covered. Seems like I'm here to do most of the work. She quipped, throwing her comment in Zane's face. Ava rummaged through the bag at her hip and pulled out 5 pieces of black cloth. Really? Torai chuckled, holding up the scrap of fabric. They were your typical burglar's masks, with the eye and mouth holes. They do in a pinch, always keep one on me. Ava winked, blowing a mint green bubble before popping it with her teeth. The house that held Alec also had a driveway that wrapped around the house. There was a backyard, with an actual fence that reached about halfway before stopping altogether. There was also a concrete foundation for a porch out front, with crappy wooden stairs leading up to the base. I was anxious now, practically twitching and shaking as we neared closer and closer. My soul knew what my body and mind couldn't figure out. I could feel Alec nearby. Even though I couldn't feel that connection between us, I knew he was here. I was sure I could feel the thud of his heart even as we stalked silently across the dewy grass. Perhaps I was just hearing things, but I clung to the hope that I would see him again, that he wouldn't be torn from me before we could truly have a life with one another. It's all right. Torai whispered, placing a hand on my back. I know you're getting a bit antsy, but we're going to get him. I'm beginning to regret leaving you. Cade's sigh sounded in my head, say the word and I'll turn right around. No, just finish what we came here to do. I can keep it together, I promise. I assured him, sending a bit of warmth and courage his way. Judging from the extra glazed look in your eye, I'd say Cade just dropped in. She giggled, the first real laugh I've heard from her since she had met her mate. My head snapped up, towards said mate. Every muscle in his body seemed to lock in place as our eyes met, and it was like we had a conversation through gaze alone. My eyes said, I know what you just felt. You can't deny it, and you can't write it off. His eyes were dark, and held the promise of 1,000 meaningless threats that failed to instill even an ounce of fear within me. Not that Zane Novak wasn't worth fearing, but I trusted my mates and their family implicitly. Extra glazed? I asked, moving an eyebrow at her. I didn't change the subject for Zane's sake, but for Alec's. The 3 of us needed to focus, and wait until Ava finishes whatever it is she does. We crept up to the front of the house, sticking low as we walked towards the backyard. Sitting in a partially finished garage was a rather new-looking SUV. There was a large hole in the backyard, square in size, and what looked to be the start of an in-ground swimming pool. A sliding glass door sat out back, and we were all careful to avoid being seen by anyone lurking. We kept low, waiting and waiting until my insides twisted with anxiety. When the dull buzz of the phone vibrating sounded, I let out a little huff of relief. Ava's finished, they're on the way. Zane murmured to the two of us, his eyes scanning the house as we all crouched low. It was then I actually noticed what he was wearing. Every single time I had seen him, he wore a tailored suit. This was the first and only time I had ever seen him in a pair of pants and a simple long-sleeve t-shirt. While I'm sure his t-shirts are 3 times the price of my own, they looked ordinary. It was another jarring, strange thing in comparison to his bitter personality. 10 minutes later, we could hear as Ava and Kate approached. Ava's pale skin was a bit red, and her eyes looked somewhat dilated. Her clothes were ruffled, and her hair a bit messy. Whatever her abilities were, they took a physical toll. What is her ability? I asked Kate, just a tad curious considering she's the second white wolf I've met. You'll have to wait and see. Kate's response was instant, and full of amusement. There's a bathroom window low to the ground. That's the best way in. Zane said in a sharp voice, nodding towards the side of the house. We managed to creep past the sliding glass door, towards the other side of the house. Kate, Ava, and I had just walked out of sight, around the corner of the house, when the sliding glass door slammed open. A gasp threatened to leave my LPS, but I managed to clamp them shut in time. The 3 of us flattened ourselves against the house, our hearts pounding in sync. Even Ava's faux relaxed demeanor shattered at the thought of truly getting caught. Even she knew the risks. Tori's emotions were the last thing I expected to feel, but what was even stranger was that they weren't negative emotions. She felt surprised, and safe, even if she was still furious and hurt. I couldn't dissect her emotions even if I wanted to, because the moment the glass door opened, a gust of air emerged from the house. Stale cigarettes, mold, cheap beer, take-out food, and the stench of body odor. In the mix of that cluster of scents was one I recognized, one that was partially my own. Alec! I gasped, leaving my place against the wall to follow his scent. Chapter 99. You can't, not yet. Kate hissed, wrapping his arm around my waist to fasten me against his torso. This was the first I had felt from him since he was taken, and now the bond between us was pulling me forward. I only stopped squirming when I noticed Tori's red face, and how she was currently backed up against Zane Novak. The 2 of them were flattened against the house. I didn't miss how his arm was wrapped around his waist, his fingers just an inch above her shirt line. His other hand still rested over her mouth, an attempt to silence her when the guard had come out to investigate. Her heart sounded like a distant helicopter, mirroring the sound of Zane's. Are you all right? I asked her, when both Kate and Zane finally let us go. I'm fine. She huffed under her breath, which was a good enough answer for me at the moment. Guys, I got the window open. Ava's sudden outburst made me jump, and instinctively place a hand against my chest. Ava sauntered up to the 4 of us, seemingly clueless to what had just happened. I got it open while you guys were busy. Zane went through the window first, before helping Tori and I through. Ava was next, and then Kate. I was surprised that Zane could actually get his hands dirty, but that in no way changed my opinion about the man. His styled hair and tailored suits made him seem neat and untouchable. This was the side of Zane that little got to see, I suspected. The side that got his hands dirty, the side that had helped to free countless white wolves. Zane Novak wasn't black or white, but various shades of grey. He helped the white wolves in his father's clutches, the ones that would go unnoticed. He even helped Navia and Isaac escape with their child, something Marcus was bound to notice. Yet, even with those good deeds, he remains at his father's side. I'll always be a bit biased though, considering he rejected my best friend. The bathroom we currently stood in was small. It fit the 5 of us, but just barely. The tile on the floor was cracked, and the toilet stained from years of dust and grime. There's 3 in the living room. Zane murmured to us, wedging the door open just a millimeter. You'll have one chance before they rush you, Ava. I got this. Ava nodded confidently, plucking the headphone from her ear to wrap the cord around her neck. Just as Ava maneuvered through the small bathroom to the door, Zane leaned in close. It was impossible not to hear what he was telling her, though I knew the words weren't meant for our ears. Do not screw up and leave me to tell your parents they lost another kid, he said, his voice hard but not cruel. Ava gave him a long look before nodding. She then gripped the doorknob in her hand, her knuckles white around the tarnished metal. She inched the bathroom door open and slid outside. Melted into the hard planes of Cade's torso, I peered through the slim crack in the door. The 3 men in the living room were sitting at a cheap fold-out table. A deck of cards was scattered amongst numerous bottles of beer. There were a few plastic plates with half-eaten pizza on them, all of which looked at least a day old. A small television in the corner of the room played an old football rerun. All 3 of the men had that large build of most werewolves, even if they weren't overtly muscular. Ava stood just at the beginning of the hall, only feet away from where the men sat. The speaker chatting away on the TV was the only thing covering the sound of her beating heart. I could tell the moment the men registered her scent, and knew that someone had broken into the house. One by one, they all stiffened. They were trying to feign nonchalance, so Ava could continue believing she hadn't yet been caught. Ava anticipated that, and flung her arms out at her sides. One of the men was just about to stand from his chair, but froze midway. 3 thuds sounded as the 2 slumped from their chairs, and the 3rd tumbled to the floor. Did she kill them? I asked, wide-eyed. Even this far in the world of werewolves, violence still surprised me. I tried not to think of what I had done to Desmond, and instead forced myself to think about Alec. No, she didn't kill them, Zane said flatly, opening the door even though he hadn't seen Ava complete the job. Clearly, he had some faith in her. Ava's young, so her abilities are still growing. All we know is they have something to do with the mind. She's able to knock just about anyone out for at least half an hour. Resisting her abilities isn't about being physically strong, but mentally. Sure enough, all 3 men were face first into the half-finished carpet of the living room. Easy. Ava shrugged, nudging one of the unconscious men with the tip of her boot. Big muscles, small brains. There's going to be more in here, Zane warned her, scowling at the man on the floor. Let's hope they thought nothing of the noise. I can't prevent everything. Ava rolled her eyes, gesturing dramatically for the 4 of us to step out of the cramped bathroom. Besides, I like the way it sounds when they fall. We searched the floor of the house, through the moldy kitchen with its leaking roof, and the dining room the guards used as a sleeping area. Once we were positive there were no more guards on the lower half of the house, we each crept upstairs. Zane remained close to Ava. I wasn't sure if it were some strange protective side of him, or if he truly didn't feel like telling her parents she had been killed. I could smell the men before I saw them. One of the upstairs showers was running, crackling, and spewing out water that smelled just a bit strange. I figured that shower was a blessing. Nothing like being stuck in a rundown house with 10 men and a broken shower. With the stench of mold alone, it was a wonder they smelled anything in here. I'll stay posted at the bathroom while you guys keep going. Make sure there's no more guards, then come back for this one. Tori suggested with a shrug. I'll let you guys know if he gets out, but with the rate that water's coming out, I'd be surprised if he finished within the next 10 minutes. Cade paused before turning his eyes on Zane. Deep within the depths of Cade's eyes, there was a certain disappointment there. Even with Cade's abrasive personality, he likes Tori. She was practically impossible not to get along with. To see his mate's best friend suffering from such a shithead, it didn't settle well with any of us. Stay with her, Cade told Zane, his gravelly voice even harsher than usual. I could see the challenge in Cade's eyes, and knew that soon Cade wouldn't hold back from getting his hands on Zane. Zane seemed to sense the same thing, but refused to back down. I've been beginning to call it an alpha's arrogance, but it seemed to be the one universal trait they all had in common. Zane's seafoam eyes darkened to that of stormy skies, where Cade's hardened to onyx. Tori seemed to sense the same thing as I, even without the ability to feel emotions. You two can finish this later, because right now is probably the worst moment for this conversation. I snapped at the two of them, not bothering to tell either one to let it go. They were both too stubborn to drop their absolute hatred of one another. I turned and locked eyes with a seething Cade, which would have been terrifying if I knew he wouldn't ever harm me. We need to find your brother, and no matter how satisfying this fight would be, it's not going to help us get Alec back. Cade's anger wasn't easily extinguished. That fire simply retreated, still burning within the depths of him. For now, though, his focus was redirected. Let's go. Cade grunted, placing a gentle hand at my back as we left Tori and Zane, continuing down the hall. Cade shadowed Ava and I as we continued onward, still protecting her as Zane would. We could hear the dull murmur of voices further down the hall and in one of the rooms. At one point, we had crouched low to avoid a gaping hole in the wall. Through there, I could make out at least 4 more men. We stopped just as the hallway ended in a right turn. At the end of that hallway was a door, with 4 men sitting around it. Another fold-out plastic table had been set up, with beer cans and fast food wrappers scattered on top. These men were like the others, their guard completely down. I could understand why they would believe we'd never find this place. It technically existed under the name of Desmond DeVille, who was rotting wherever Jasper Fox had put him. The thought still churned my stomach, a side effect I wasn't sure would ever fade. If it weren't for Zane's information, would we ever have found this place? Could Garrett, Julian, or the twins' resources have discovered this? 4. Ava muttered under her breath, "Man, he needs to take me out for practice more. I'm never going to get stronger if I can't flex my abilities a little." She stepped out from behind the corner at the very last moment, her arms stretched out at her sides. The men never even had time to glance her way before their eyes rolled and their bodies slumped to the floor. Ava swayed for a moment, but caught herself against the wall. She frowned and waved Cade away as he came over to help. "I'll be fine. Just haven't used my abilities on that many people before." She huffed, straightening herself and smoothing out her skirt. "I'm going to knock that last guy out, then fetch Zane and Tori." Ava stalked off down the hall, and I turned my attention on the door that sat ahead. My heart was thundering now, not from the adrenaline, but from the dull scent that still lingered in the hallway. I took deep breaths of it, my chest aching as I remembered the night he had been taken. I could feel the tether connecting the three of us, and right now it was guiding me forward. To the door at the end of the hall, where Alec's scent was strongest. I would have stumbled forward if it weren't for Cade's reassuring arm around my waist, guiding me forward and over the unconscious guards. "Can you feel him?" Cade asked, his voice unusually low. "I can." I nodded, without a single trace of doubt in my voice. "He might be unconscious, but he's alive. I can feel him too," Cade admitted, just a glimmer of hope in his eyes. As Cade gripped the doorknob with steady fingers, I sucked in a harsh breath. The hinges creaked and groaned, rusted from being unused. The bedroom was clearly meant to be the master, and was free of all furniture apart from a bed. On that bed, with an 4 in his arm, was Alec. Rage burned within me at the sight of him. He had clearly lost weight, and was being fed through some kind of tube. There were dark circles under his eyes, his hair messy and greasy, but he was alive. I could hear the strong thud of his heart, and knew it would play in my ears for a long time to come. I stood there for a few seconds, tracing my eyes over every inch of him. My fingers twitched when I found the spot where his dimple was, a few inches from the corner of his lips. For once, I couldn't focus on the emotions of the people around me. All I could feel was my endless guilt, smothering me like a thick quilt. We would get him out of here, and he would never look like this again. I reminded myself of this over and over again, until the pain lessened enough for me to breathe. "I can get these tubes out of him." I could hear Tori's voice from far away, drifting closer with each beat of Alec's heart. Her nervous chuckle was close by. "Dad taught me something useful after all. Breathe, sweetheart." Cade's thoughts trickled in with my own, pulling me from the abyss I had nearly fallen into. "I know what you're thinking, and none of this is your fault. You couldn't hide yourself from the world, it wouldn't have lasted, and it wasn't what was best for you. Eventually, Marcus would have found out about you. We were created for each other, because one mate isn't enough to protect you. What Alec just went through, we would both endure it if it kept you safe." Chapter 100. The only thing that kept me from erupting into a revenge-fueled rage was the fact that we still needed to get Alec out of here. Once Tori removed all of the tubes, including the steady drip of sedatives that kept him comatose, his eyelashes had barely fluttered. It would be some time before he actually came to, but all that mattered was that he was finally home. Both Zane and Cade supported Alec, draping one of his arms over their shoulders. As we readied to get out of here, I couldn't help but stop and place my hand against Alec's face. He had thick stubble coating his chin and jaw, the same onyx color as his hair. As I trailed my fingers down his face, I could feel that wall holding back my emotions quiver. "All right, let's get out of here." I exhaled, pulling away from Alec with what I'm sure was a pained expression on my face. If I stayed here any longer, seeing the physical effects of what they had done to him, I wasn't sure there would be a house standing. I turned my back on Alec, and crept from the room. We moved a bit slower with Alec in tow, but the slower pace helped us remain quiet. We drifted through the top part of the house, to the stairs that were a complete safety hazard. We avoided the massive hole in the dry wall that exposed us to the street in front of the house. We were walking through the living room, towards the back door, when something caused me to stop. Tori, who had been walking beside me, stopped as well. Ava was taking up the back, making sure all the guards were still passed out. "What's wrong?" Cade asked immediately, his eyes scanning the room. There were 6 of us, including me. I could feel all 6 of our emotions, though Alec's were dull and watery in his DG-induced state. What had caused me to stop was the 7th set of emotions I felt. I blinked a few times and eyed the unconscious bodies on the floor. The two men were still slumped on the floor. Weren't there three men on the? Everything seemed to slow as the third man appeared from around the corner. I stood only inches from him, far too close to act so quickly. I first felt the roughness of his arm as he wrapped it around my shoulders. Then, I could feel the sharp pinpricks his lengthened nails left in my skin. My pulse thundered under his fingers, a frantic tune of mistakes, second chances, and whispered prayers. I knew that our one option at survival meant surrendering, but I couldn't force the words past my lips. Even if it meant surviving, I wouldn't choose to become someone's weapon. Cade went completely still, his eyes honed on the man that held my life in his hands. Zane, with actual worry in his eyes, supported Alec's full weight so Cade could step forward. A low growl worked its way from his lips. The sound made my sweat turn cold, because I knew by the guard's emotions, that he saw Cade's reaction as a challenge. Just as I readied myself to tell Cade to lunge, a dreadful idea crossed my mind. It was one laced with temptation, but I was just desperate enough to try it. Before I had the chance to try out my plan, Ava began to fling her arms out. The air was ripped from my lungs faster than I could blink. I was pressed against this nameless guard, the sick stench of his body odor assaulting my nose. His hand was wrapped around my throat now, and the tips of his nails were piercing my skin hard enough to draw blood. A small trickle ran down my neck, itching as it dried onto my skin. "Don't think about it." The guard snarled at Ava, grasping my throat even harder to prove his point. I wasn't sure if it were the strangled croak that left my lips, or the guard's demand, but Ava slowly lowered her arms and lowered her head. The guard eyed us frantically, his fear and hatred meshing into one big blob. Really, Ava's action hadn't been completely useless. The guard was holding me even tighter now. My back was pressed up against his chest, and his fingers touched the hollow of my throat. I had initially promised myself never to use my soul-devouring abilities again, but wolves were very different from humans. Thalia couldn't understand why I would amputate a part of myself, like willingly losing an arm or leg. Wolves were predators, who embraced every dark aspect of themselves. While I was far from a ruthless, cold-blooded, Thalia was right, I couldn't cut off a part of myself. I wasn't sure if I could replicate what I had done to Desmond and his men. I had been running on pure adrenaline at the time, not abject fear, as I am now. Either way, I needed to be precise. If I took in a huge gust without him, I'd lose my life. Whoever this guard was, his reflexes were fast. His thumb tapped against the side of my neck, following the beat of my thundering pulse. The physical contact made things easier. Through his emotions I could feel the shimmering heat of his soul. The power that throbbed and pulsed where mortal eyes couldn't see. My instincts told me to drink greedily, to take the power that's been given to me. I had to fight myself to keep from going into a frenzy. I reached out and brushed against that power, sinking my metaphorical claws just a few millimeters into it. I tried not to let my pulse convey the relief I felt when a trickle of strength and power began to seep into my weary bones. The guard let out a grunt, which made my pulse thunder even higher at the thought of being caught. "Stand down!" The guard snarled at Cade, who had been inching closer with every passing second. Cade's eyes were lit cruelly, filled to the brim with carnal anticipation. If this man killed me, Cade would eviscerate him. "I've already called back up. Your magic didn't work on me." My strength was building now, so I widened that hole which allowed his life source to flow into me. A heavy shudder racked his entire body, jolting the claws that were currently in my neck. Cade leaned forward like he was going to lunge, but froze when he caught sight of my eyes. "Don't move!" I threw my thoughts at him with all the force I had, begging him to stand down. Once the guard had stilled, he wobbled on his feet. What are you doing to me?" he rasped, and I tore open the barrier that kept me from devouring his strength. One rough pull of his soul, all that I could take with one inhale. I felt my body expand with the inhale, and the boundaries of my abilities stretch and groan. The moment all of that power settled within me, I let it loose in one blast. A ring of pure energy left my body and sent the drained guard soaring across the room. I wobbled on my legs, finally free from the guard's tight grip around my throat. Now that his hand was gone, I should be able to breathe. My hands flew up to my throat, and were instantly coated in the thick warmth that was my lifeblood. Cade rushed forwards just as I began to fall, catching me before my head could hit the floor. Everything seemed to blur as I watched the scene unfold. Zane and Ava hovered over me, both pale-faced and wide-eyed. Cade was saying something to me, pressing on my neck wound while trying not to cut off my air. I only seemed to tune back in when Tori dropped to her knees in front of me and took my face in her hands. All of the sounds and smells, they hit me at once. Ava was muttering to herself, shaking her head. Cade was frantically trying to stop the bleeding, telling me over and over again that I would heal. He knew that I had expended all of my energy throwing the guard off of me. I had nothing left to give. "Heal yourself!" Tori shouted in my face, her shrill voice pierced my ears. I understood what she was saying, but I couldn't force myself to form a response. I couldn't feed from her, I wasn't even sure I'd be able to stop. She muttered a curse and moved back her hand before striking me in the face. I'm sure she hadn't hit as hard as I made it out to be, but it caught my attention. I blinked a few times and stared at her, feeling numb and floaty. "Feed off my soul and heal yourself, Claire." Cade's eyes darted over to Tori, desperate and wishing he could force me to feed himself. Somehow, I knew that my soul-eating abilities wouldn't work on Alec or Cade. We were all pieces of the same soul, so feeding on them was like feeding on myself. Cade knew this as well, which is why he hadn't offered himself up. "Don't you dare!" Zane snarled, charging forwards. His eyes flashed dangerously as they burned holes in the back of Tori's head, but she wasn't paying attention to him. "Do it!" Tori shouted at me, her voice cracking as she gave me another shake. "No!" Zane snapped, his voice resolute. His eyes were on me this time, bright and furious. "Take what you need from me, Claire. I would, however, like to request that you leave me alive." I had no control as my magic lashed out and sunk its claws into Zane Novak. It's like it had been waiting for him to offer, and took without abandon as adrenaline fueled our will to survive. Zane stiffened first, and a look of discomfort settled on his face. His skin paled and his body swayed before collapsing to his knees in front of me. Tori inched away from him, a conflicted look on her face. Her fingers trembled, and she brought them into her chest as though she were tempted to reach out and touch him. I noticed she made her decision when her eyes hardened, and she moved even further away from where Zane crouched. Warmth flooded me, chasing away the cold and fogginess that crept at the edges of my vision. I could feel pressure and some pain as the wound in my neck finally began to heal. I felt each individual fiber of flesh knitting itself together, fueled by Zane Novak's life force. I slashed through my connection to Zane the moment I was healed, even though all of my instincts were telling me to bleed him dry. I was healed, but far from being at my fullest strength. As I stopped feeding from Zane, and we locked eyes, I realized I had just outed myself to the second most dangerous person in the werewolf world. Not only did Jasper Fox know I was a soul eater, but Marcus Novak's son now knew as well. "We need to get out of here," Zane grumbled, forcing himself into a standing position. He wobbled for a moment, and I couldn't help but notice the way Tori's eyes darted over his shaking frame. If he's really called back up, it won't take them long to get here. Somehow, the six of us managed to escape the house and make the trek back through the small patch of forest and to the sedan we had parked earlier. Zane sat in the passenger, while Alec was seated between Tori and I. Ava was in the very back, nodding her head to whatever song was blasting through her headphones. I wanted to ask Zane more about her, but none of us had been in a talking mood since leaving the house. I had been keeping a close eye on Zane since feeding off of him. His skin had gone from sickly and translucent to a semi-healthy shade within half an hour after nearly draining him. He was still weak, that I could tell from the way he grimaced and rubbed at his temples. It seemed as long as I didn't drain someone entirely, they could survive after I've fed from them. I'm willing to bet that there's the backup that Guard was talking about. Cade commented, nodding towards the other side of the highway. 6 identical-looking black SUVs sped in a uniform line. I placed my head against Alec's shoulder and was grateful for the tint on our vehicle. In the midst of everything that's happened, I had completely forgotten we weren't supposed to have left the hotel, just as we weren't supposed to have rescued Alec from Marcus Novak's greedy clutches. We needed to keep our activities a secret, which also meant keeping Alec hidden away in the suite. With the help of his White Wolf companions, Zane managed to get us back up to our suite without being detected. He was obviously reluctant giving up any of his secrets, but did let it slip that he has a few friends in place as employees here in the hotel, which explained our backdoor entrance. Cade had just helped Alec inside the suite when Zane turned and gave me a long look, one that made me feel a bit dissected and exposed. He paid Tori no mind, but he couldn't erase what had happened here today. Their bond was stronger now, just from those simple interactions. My father already suspects that you might be a soul eater, but once he knows for sure, he will stop at absolutely nothing to own you. He grimaced, and turned as if to walk away. I could sense his hesitation, just like I could practically see the unsaid words hovering over his L.P.S. He let out a small sigh, one so quiet most would have missed it. Should things go bad tomorrow, you'll need to have an escape plan ready. Torn between two worlds, born and bred in the shadows, Zane Novak turned on his heel and vanished down the hall. Chapter 101. How are we supposed to come up with an escape plan an hour before our final meeting? I hissed once we were all within the confines of our suite. Sweetheart, my parents and I have been mulling over escape plans for at least a week now. Cade chuckled, crossing his muscular arms over his chest. Ever since we found out the High Table wanted to meet you, we began planning. Garrett and Julian have been helping as well. I'm sure they've come up with something by now. Alec was draped across the sectional. The sporadic flutter of his eyelashes was the only sign that the sedative was beginning to wear off. All eyes snapped over to Alec when a husky mumble came from him. Tori was at his side in seconds, checking him over in a way she had done 3 times now. When I had ran away, Tori began an apprenticeship under her dad. The time she didn't spend looking for me was dedicated to nightly shifts at the hospital. It's wearing off faster. He should be lucid within the hour. Tori said, her words reassuring me. The first thing I planned on doing was getting some food in his system, then I'd contemplate hunting down Marcus Novak and removing him from his position at the High Table. If only your little fantasy were achievable. Cade's thoughts melted into my own, and I flushed at the laughter in his voice. Though, I did enjoy the part where you mercilessly blew the head off of Marcus Novak. If you don't like my fantasy, I began, but was interrupted as the door to our suite swung wide open. The twins' parents were first to storm inside, faces hewn and eyes worried. The door had been locked, but they had a key of their own to get inside. It made it safer to just have constant access to one another, especially with what happened at the last hotel. Their mom's blonde hair was pulled up into a neat wrap, and though her sleek skirt and blazer were professional, I could see how shaken up she was. Their father was much better at hiding his emotions, just like his sons. His onyx hair was swept to the side, and his navy suit made his eyes seem even darker. Their eyes roamed the room for half a second before settling on Alec. There was no surprise there, only aching, mind-numbing relief. "I knew it, you've got him." Their mom exhaled, her eyes wide as she looked at her unconscious son. The hand that was placed against her chest trembled, even though her eyes hardened considerably. It was her husband's hand on her shoulder that kept her from running forward, to embrace the son she thought she had lost. Surprisingly, when she turned to speak, it was me she spoke to. "Do you know who took him?" "Marcus Novak was responsible." I answered without hesitation, trusting them well enough to know that my words would never leave this room. "That man uses his money and power to breathe down our necks, to keep us under his foot." She huffed, fury brimming in both her emotions and eyes. After a deep breath, she continued. Her movements were a bit rushed, which led me to wonder if something else had happened. "Listen to me, I don't know how you rescued him or when, but the entire hotel is on silent alert. There are guards everywhere right now, posing as employees and witnesses. I think he knows you've rescued my son. No matter how this last meeting goes, I won't rest until Marcus is permanently removed from the high table, and stripped of his position as alpha." I promised her, infusing all of the courage I could muster into my words. The door opened again, letting in Garrett and Julian. While I wasn't surprised to see Julian flash me a grin and a wink, I was surprised to feel a very distinct lack of anger radiating from Garrett. "What is that look for, Claire?" Garrett drawled slowly once we locked eyes. His blue and brown eye mirrored my own, as did his chestnut hair and full eyebrows. He twitched just an increment as he continued, "You are well aware I have a mate as well, yes? I am very aware of the lengths one would go to for such a person." I wasn't sure what to say at that, but felt a bit uncomfortable as a strange feeling ran through me. Garrett would never be named Father of the Year, but he had left his mate and daughter to come and help me. Even if it were for selfish reasons, he's stuck with me thus far. Marcus Novak says there's been a breach in the hotel security, and that one or more intruders may be in the building. It's quite clearly a cover-up, disguising the fact that his captive has now been rescued. Garrett told Kate and I, his eyes flitting over to where Alec lay. While I'll never be fond of my daughter being in danger, I realize she was not given these abilities to live out an ordinary life. "I expect you to protect her at all costs, but I am relieved to see that your brother is alive." I could feel how those words physically pained him, but once they were spoken, the smallest flicker of respect ignited in Kate's eyes. "Claire." It felt like months since I had heard his voice, and every muscle in my body reacted at the sound. I pivoted, turning so fast that I nearly stumbled into the coffee table. My knees hit the plush carpet, and my hands came up to hold the sides of his face. His stubble brushed my palms, and his eyes fluttered as he mumbled my name again, and again. "He's going to be awake soon," I told everyone in the room, not bothering to turn my eyes away from Alec. His brows were furrowed, but relaxed as I trailed my fingers through his hair. "We can't leave, not yet. The final meeting's been moved up, Claire," Julian said, frowning when I whipped my head around to stare at him. "We've got only 20 minutes to arrive before we're counted as late. He's getting everyone together, possibly trying to flush us out." Cade grimaced, giving his unconscious brother a long look. His voice was hard and flat, "It's not safe to leave him here. Not when Marcus can send a squad of men to come and take him back. There was another knock at the door that captured everyone's attention. Whoever was at the other end knocked once, then twice, then continued in a rapid succession of taps that sounded almost like a song. "Expecting someone?" Garrett asked, narrowing his eyes at the source of annoyance on the other end of the door. He walked over to the peephole and glanced out before turning to Cade and I with a look of confusion on his face. "It's a girl, her hair is purple. It's Ava. Let her in." I snorted at Garrett's comment-turned-question. As soon as Garrett unlocked the door, Ava came storming in. Her tangled headphones skidded across the carpet as she practically ran inside. After brushing several purple strands of hair from her forehead, she moved an eyebrow at all of us. Hello? Were you trying to get me caught?" Ava scoffed, placing her black painted nails against her chest. "Seriously, I'm the one doing you a favor. I'm not the one who wants to play babysitter to a kidnapped alpha with a narcotics addiction. Consider that next time you keep me waiting in the hall for eons. There is so much to unpack with that." Tori sighed, sitting down on the couch beside Alec's slumbering form. "You know this wolf?" Garrett asked a bit snidely, giving Ava a look that she returned in triple. "Day, she knows me. She wouldn't have let me in if she didn't." Ava sighed, rolling her eyes before glancing down at Alec. "So is he gonna be all comatose all day, or am I gonna have someone to talk to?" What are you talking about, Ava?" I asked, utterly clueless as to what she was talking about. "What do you mean, what am I talking about?" she retorted, clearly in a bit of a mood today. "Zane asked if I could babysit your beefy mate while he's drugged up, so that you could go figure out whether or not the Witless Five are going to let you live past sundown. He never told us that." I frowned, turning towards Cade. "Did he send us a note?" "Not that I or any of the guards have received," he replied, looking just as troubled as I. "Take that up with him the next time you guys meet, but I'm here now. Let me do what I came here to do," Ava insisted, already beginning to untangle her seemingly indestructible headphones. "Besides, it's not like you couldn't use the help. Is there a reason you're particularly snarky today?" Tori asked, just as bold as Ava. There was no malice in Tori's eyes, just partially amused curiosity. "All of the employees are busy with this stupid meeting," she began with a huff. Her eyes widened a bit as she registered what she said. "Not that your life isn't important or anything, but do they really have to vote on it? Either way, Zane failed to mention there would be no one escorting me through the employee areas and up to your suite. So, I was stuck hiding under a food cart until they dropped me off at this floor." "Do you know what's in the bottom of a food cart?" "Food. Old, disgusting food. There's a shower and spare clothes if you wanted to wash up," I offered, grateful for Zane's help even if I refused to trust the cowardly man. "I'm sorry, but are you sure you trust her to watch Alec?" the twins' mom asked, rightfully worried about her son. Ava turned and looked at me, clearly waiting for my answer. I didn't exactly trust Ava, and I think she knew that, but she would also gain nothing by harming Cade. Our kind were being enslaved, used as weapons for cruel alphas with severe superiority complexes. They could sit behind their walls and watch atop their thrones as wars are fought and won with the blood of the many. Even though we didn't trust one another, we knew without a doubt that we were both on the same side. "She'll keep him safe," I promised their mom, hoping she could see the confidence in my eyes. 15 minutes later, all of us apart from Ava and Alec, left for our final meeting with the high table. I had left Alec a note, pinned to the coffee table by a bottle of water. "Alec, I wish so badly that I could be there when you finally woke up. Things have been a mess without you, and when they finally calm down, the three of us are taking some time off. I need to get past the fear of losing you, just as I'm sure you also have a few things to work through. It's best that you stay in the room while we're suffering through the final meeting. Ava is an ally, she's safe to be around. Marcus already knows you've been sprung, but not by who. Today's the big day they debate whether or not I'm too dangerous to live, like a rabid animal. No matter the outcome of today's meeting, we will come back for you right after the meeting. Always yours, Claire. The only thing I had learned from my time within such close proximity to our species' government was that we desperately needed a new one. I still had mixed feelings about Jasper Fox, and Braden Cliff was still a mystery as well. I knew without a doubt that Marcus Novak and Sebastian Sable both needed to go along with their illegal operations. From the looks of the court-like room we stood in, you could tell something was wrong. While the search hadn't been publicly announced, there were some of us able to figure out those kinds of things. The twins' parents had been the first to know about the lockdown, from a friend in the witness stands. One by one, each member of the high table walked to the raised platform and sat at their respective seats. The growing crowd of witnesses sat in rows around the circumference of the room, grouped in their own respective packs and families. The number of witnesses had nearly doubled overnight, leaving the small sectioned-off areas overflowing with people. I had been jostled and bumped into at least 30 separate times, though most cowered away once they realized it was me. Marcus Novak sat at the very center, as the head of the high table. His suit was slate gray this time, just a few shades darker than his son's. Zane sat in his own closed-off area, with a minimum of 4 guards at his side. He looked a bit miserable if I were being honest, but that was the usual expression on his face. Welcome to the conclusion of this incredible debate that will affect our world for generations to come. We are constantly making history, with every decision and choice we make. We have debated much on this matter, both during these meetings and behind closed doors. The 5 of us are confident that today will bring all of us, and Ms. Claire, the conclusion we need. Marcus Novak stood, greeting the crowd with a wide sweep of his hand. His smile was charming and charismatic, every bit the Bachelor instead of the bloodthirsty wolf. We will pick up from yesterday by calling Claire to the stand. Here she will review the terms of our offers and make any refusals or demands she sees fit. Together, we will assess her standing in our world and determine what course of action will propel us into a safe future where our kind continues to thrive. This time, I did roll my eyes as some of the witnesses went into heart-wrenching applauses, with watery eyes to top things off. I couldn't understand how a room full of werewolves could fail to see the biggest threat in the room, Marcus Novak. I approached the stand and waited in silence as a moderator went over the details of each agreement with the high table members. Sebastian Sable offered me nothing apart from a slithery smirk that made my insides turn. Nico DeVille claimed his father had still not returned, but actually said that he had contacted him and refused to form any ties with our packs. Jasper Fox sent me a wink at that, one so quick I had nearly missed it. Silence enveloped the room as it was my turn to speak, to save or condemn myself. I could save myself by agreeing to Marcus's terms, to signing my freedom and wool away to serve another. One who would take and take until I too was drained, devoid of a soul like the ones I had fed on. I had planned what I wanted to say, and told no one. Cade was the only one who knew what I had chosen, and not because we could read one another's thoughts. We still offered one another privacy, but Cade, Alec, and I were equals. I wouldn't make a huge decision like this without the trust of one or both. I, and those I trust, have reviewed your offers extensively. I am humbled by the opportunities you've presented my way. I stated loudly, keeping my face and eyes neutral as they remained locked on Marcus. I squared my shoulders, and felt my voice take on a new tone. It sounded layered in a way it wasn't before, interwoven with authority and confidence that seemed much too mature for my young years. It is within my own best interest that I refuse all three of your offers. I might not be familiar to our customs and ways, but I do know that all life holds value. No white wolf, regardless of status, should be forced to prove their right to live. Given to me at birth, I am Luna of not one, but 3 packs. No one can withhold that title from me. The room was silent for a few seconds before erupting in chaos. Words were screamed on all sides, slurs and praises. There were some cheering me on, telling me to destroy and rebuild the high table. Others called me a treasonous, amongst other colorful things. During all of the commotion I noticed something. A small woman, dainty and fragile in stature, approached Marcus Novak. Her onyx hair was long and straight, plastered to her head. She moved slowly, meekly towards him. He lowered himself as she whispered in his ear, and never once did his facial expression change as he listened to her words. What was worse, I swore I could feel just a flicker of carnal happiness inside his cold, stagnant heart. The commotion continued, and Marcus did nothing to stop it. My eyes flickered to Jaspa, who was watching Marcus with a guarded look on his face. Marcus motioned to one of the guards and said 3 words that sent things spiraling down. I could not hear the words he spoke, but could assume what they meant when the 4 guards surrounding Zane Novak surged forward and placed silver clasps around his wrists. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Zane didn't thrash, nor fight against his father's men. His ice-coated eyes stared out just past me, to the redhead with flaming hair and eyes of moss-colored agony. Most of the witnesses were blind to what was happening, whipped up into a frenzy of my doing. Zane was dragged from the room by the 4 guards who had been protecting him, the silver clasps around his wrists the only indicator that they had new orders. Now let us compose ourselves, yes. Marcus Novak said to the crowd, his smile full and renewed. He was ignoring what had just happened, even though there were few in the room who had seen the truth. The golden-haired couple were 2 who had noticed what just happened, and stared at Marcus with identical accusatory glares. We must respect Ms. Claire's decision, and excuse her lack of manners with our system. I do believe now might be the time to discuss things further, and vote on the outcome of our future. The 5 high table members then retreated to a private room where they would continue discussing my right to live. What I don't understand. Tori stammered, taking a few steps towards the door Zane had been dragged through. I understand you want to go after them, but you can't. I told her, grabbing her shoulders with firm hands. They don't know who you are, they can't know, and Marcus can't either. He will use you to get to Zane, he'll use you to control him. What do you think is going to happen to him? She asked quietly, a mess of emotions swirling within her. Even rejected and angry, she couldn't not care about him. I don't know, Tori. I answered honestly, feeling my chest tighten as I made her a promise. I hoped I wouldn't live to regret. If there's anything we can do to help him, we will try. Minutes melted into one another until nearly half an hour passed. All eyes were alert as the high table members filtered back to their respective seats, with Marcus at the helm. As Marcus stood, there was a glint in his eye that seemed just a tad smug. It sends a sour feeling rushing through me, letting me know something was wrong. New information has recently come to light, which we have included in the decision of our final vote. Marcus began, his pale eyes flickering down to where I stood at the stand. There was nothing short of cold, cruel, triumph in his eyes. It is unknown to many that a band of treasonous white wolves escaped my borders recently. These wolves are powerful and dangerous, murderers of the absolute worst variety. I have kept them alive as merely a tribute to their unique abilities, as it would be a shame to snuff out a life so incredible. As many of you know, I pride myself on the security of my pack and its borders. I now have evidence that these white wolves were not working alone. Claire and those she surrounds herself with, staged a coup to rescue these prisoners. This information was crucial in deciding our course of action for the foreseeable future. The room did not erupt into chaos this time. There were no hurling insults or praises, screaming at the pack sitting closest to you that their opinions and beliefs were wrong. There was only silence, and that thick foreboding where you know everything is going. Marcus didn't miss a beat. Sympathy flashed in his eyes, and his voice deepened until it was almost sorry. This was the last thing he wanted to do, his tone said. I have given this much thought. It is not often in a high-table member's life to make such an important, history-altering decision. With my full confidence, I do believe it's best if Ms. Claire were taken into the custody of the high table. Her abilities are simply too dangerous to unleash on our fragile world. Should she develop into a soul eater, it would be safest for those under our protection if Claire remains beneath our wing. We absolutely cannot allow instability within our communities. It is the poison that will crumble our castles and ultimately, put an end to our species. Marcus said loudly to the room. His calculating eyes were still locked on mine when he said, "Guards, bring her to me." Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.